Asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chat, believing in my own will. Rap fire, math evil, scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still with no chill. Need to come and take it if you wanna mess with my hill. We've been 3D printing, set and ready for that ghost kill.
Hello, Canada, and welcome to another episode of The Maple Pill. As always, I'm your host, Matt McKeever. Welcome to episode 42. So we're 42 episodes deep into the Maple Pill. Appreciate everyone that's been coming along for the ride. Those of you smashing the like button and subscribe, all that good stuff. And I guess before we jump into tonight's stories, and we'll be, touching base in regards to what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, in addition to some updates around the Freedom Trucker Convoy, and particularly talking about some of the new information coming out about some of the bank accounts that were frozen. And then we've got a full course of pills to cover as well. But the first thing I thought I'd maybe just start off the show with is discussing, do you guys feel like the more you study what's going on in regards to geopolitical affairs and, how the world works, the less you actually really understand about what the hell's going on? In particular, trying to follow along with this Ukraine-Russia conflict, honestly, it seems like every single story when it first breaks ends up being proven to be slightly different, or there's at least several other sides to that story as well. Recently, one of the ones that kind of comes to mind for me is in regards to the nuclear power plant that was claimed that Russia was attacking. Now, if you guys, I encourage you to go down your own rabbit hole of research on this, but if you dig into it, you'll find that at least from Russia's perspective, they claim they actually already had control of the nuclear power plant, and then civilians with essentially small arms and military-grade weapons attack them. So again, it feels so difficult to separate fact from fiction. And we've talked about this before, but I think it's worth repeating. Understand that honestly, without the grace period of at least a week or honestly a few years, I think it's going to be difficult to fully know what's going on in regards to this conflict, or honestly just in general, because everyone's propaganda machines are pretty effective these days. And so again, one thing I always try and remind myself, if I'm getting emotional about a story or a certain perspective, that's probably a sign that it's, at least if nothing else, hitting on some of my biases. Doesn't mean it couldn't be true, but it's important to keep in mind. And so we're also going to be exploring in today's show in regards to what's going on with Ukraine and Biolabs and the US's involvement and all that as well. And that's a very interesting rabbit hole as well. So anyways, let's jump into it. I'm going to pull up my screen share, and we're going to start off today with an article from the Globe and Mail. Russia-Ukraine live updates. U.S. surprised at Poland's decision to give MiG-29 jets. Starbucks, McDonald's join list of companies suspending operations in Russia. So one, it's interesting that, both these aspects are the most important aspects from the Globe and Mail's perspective in regards to covering what's going on in Ukraine. So one, we've got Poland essentially swapping military-grade aircraft with Ukraine. And for the U.S. to say this is a surprise, I guess, color me surprised if Poland, a NATO member, would literally do this without the U.S.'s blessing. Now, again, I can understand for the reason of geopolitical posturing that the U.S. will want to pretend to be surprised, but it feels highly unlikely that Poland would do this in isolation. But again, love to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions on this story and all the stories we're going to cover tonight. And a reminder, links to all the stories in the video description down below. I really do want the Maple Pill to be not the end of your research gathering journey, but just the jumping off point. So what I did want to highlight here, though, is in addition to, more virtue signaling from large corporations in regards to doing business in Russia, such as Starbucks and McDonald's, we're also seeing that Zelensky is pressing the West, and he recently just gave a speech in, I think it was British Parliament, asking Britain and essentially the UN and everyone else involved to recognize Russia as a terrorist state. And 2 million refugees have now left Ukraine, according to the UN. So one thing that is important to touch upon here is the UN recently, and you guys can check this out in the Irish Times, but the UN actually just warned all of its employees and members essentially to stay neutral, not like UN members, but like members that work for the UN, to stay neutral in their language right now in regards to what's going on with the conflict in Ukraine. So they're not supposed to be referring to it as a war or an invasion at this point in time. So again, it's interesting because you certainly wouldn't know that the UN hasn't picked a side in regards to what's going on right now if you were to look at mainstream media. And certainly we've seen a lot of member nations speak out against Russia. But again, it's not quite as cut and dried as I think that you would be led to believe if you were just to read one single article. But again, moving on here, what I want to highlight from CBC News, this is just interesting. TD customer questions $50 charge for donating to Ukraine aid efforts. The bank is now among those waiving fees. So again, just a quick reminder, if you donate to the Freedom Trucker Convoy, your accounts could be frozen and you'd be considered kind of an enemy of the state. Alternatively, if you're donating to Ukraine, which again, I believe you should have all the rights to do, people are upset that they had to pay wire transfer fees, which is just kind of the way of doing business, sadly, unless you're using something like crypto. But essentially, this article goes on to talk about how customers were complaining that they had to pay these banking fees. And so now the big banks are waiving fees associated with donating to the conflict in Ukraine. But at the same time, they'll freeze your ass if you donate to the Freedom Trucker Convoy again and the government enacts the Emergencies Act again. So, we Canadians better be on the best behavior when it comes to domestic affairs, but go wild when it comes to international affairs. Next from the Canadian Press, fines issued after plane with Russian nationals on board grounded in Yellowknife. And so this article technically says things, but at the same time, I couldn't actually figure out exactly what happened in this. So it turns out it wasn't a Russian plane and it wasn't a Russian pilot and it wasn't a Russian company. It just had Russian passengers, but yet Transport Canada is still saying that they violated Canadian airspace. So they didn't really explain how this all worked or why the plane was detained. Essentially, the plane was allowed to leave again, but just couldn't have any passengers or couldn't carry their Russian passengers, which I guess means that they're stranded now in Yellowknife. So anyways, just interesting, but I also thought I'd just highlight, I don't know how often you guys dive deep into these sort of stories, but this story and a lot of the stories that we actually cover from time to time from the Canadian Press, this story was produced with financial assistance of the Facebook and Canadian Press News Fellowship. So again, I'm sure that they don't have any biases or any perspective that they're trying to push upon the general public, but it is interesting that, like, again, they don't explicitly say how they violated Canadian airspace. I don't know. We'll see how this goes. Maybe there's better articles out there in regards to the subject matter. I didn't dive super deep into it, but this one, again, has a lot of words without saying much. Next from CBC News, the cost of China's no-limit support for Putin. Did Beijing get played with the Ukraine invasion? And so first things first, who knows? I imagine Russia and China aren't literally like this when it comes to the Ukraine situation. However, to think that Beijing got played by Russia in regards to what's going on in Ukraine, I think does a disservice to the CCP. The CCP as one of the largest networks, right, in regards to their expat community and their spy operations, the United Workers Front, right, and all these other organizations. And again, if you guys ever want to dive deeper into it, I encourage you to check out the book Claws of the Panda, as well if you want to understand how it's impacting Canadian real estate and money laundering. Willful Blindness by Sam Cooper is a fantastic book. But it is interesting because I think that if this conflict continues, and it seems like it's at least going to continue for the foreseeable near future, the Western mainstream media, corporate press, legacy, all that jumble of terms I like to apply to them, they're going to find themselves in this awkward position where they're going to want to condemn Russia for every single thing Russia's doing, and yet they're not going to want to make China too dirty. Because if we throw too much mud at China, one, there could be real consequences, and two, then we'd have to start actually looking into Chinese affairs as well and, question and compare, how severe is what's going on in Ukraine compared to, say, what's going on with the Uyghur Muslims in China. So again, this kind of narrative that China is somehow getting played by Putin, I just think is personally hilarious, particularly seeing how it comes from the CBC. Next, we just want to highlight the Clinton Foundation is gearing up again. And so I'm sure that this is just a coincidence. And again, it's probably just a coincidence that the largest foreign national donors to the Clinton Foundation were Ukrainian oligarchs. It's also probably just a coincidence that they actually shut down the Clinton Foundation during Trump's presidency. And now that Joe Biden's in power and the Democrats are back in power, that they're gearing up the Clinton Foundation again. I'm sure this is all just a crazy set of coincidence. But if you guys are interested, Keenan at the Counter Signals done a good initial article, just kind of reminding us about what the Clinton Global Initiative is all about. In addition, if you guys want to go a little bit further down the rabbit hole, I've also shared a link here to American Thinker. And essentially, it just highlights a few different sources and again talks about the impact the Clintons and their Global Initiative Foundation has had over the years, and maybe calls into question whether they've got the best intentions for the whole world. But just want to highlight this again. Third, Ukraine is an issue now. Where did the Clintons get the biggest chunk of their cash in the past? Yep, Ukraine. Ukraine's oligarchs have been the number one donor to the Clinton Foundation in the past. And it's actually a pretty significant lead they've got compared to other countries. So again, if you guys want to dive deeper into this, I really encourage you to do so. I imagine we'll be talking about the Clinton Foundation in the future, but right now there's still just a lot of things to cover. Next, we've talked about, I think, really early on in the Ukraine conflict, I kind of brought up one of the conspiracy theories that's out there circulating in regards to U.S. Biolabs and whether they're Ukraine or U.S. and whether they're just like, generic biolabs like CDC labs, or whether they're, maybe into more nefarious biological warfare. And recently, today, a couple of news stories have been breaking out around this. Again, I do want to frame this as like, I don't see a smoking gun here, but I think we're slowly nudging ourselves more and more into the direction of this is going to become a really confusing and quagmire of narrative. So if I was to give my hot take right now, I think that there's probably some shenanigans going on in these Ukrainian biolabs that appear to be funded or promoted or supported by the U.S. government. I imagine that if we were to find these sort of labs in a enemy state, like say we found them in Iraq or Syria or Russia, I suspect that we probably would demonize these labs. But because they're a friendly nation, I imagine we focused on really framing them in the most positive light possible. But today, U.S. Undersecretary of State Victoria Nuland says Washington is working with Ukraine to prevent biological research facilities from falling into Russian hands. She just confirmed every conspiracy theory about the existence of these labs. So let's just quickly listen.
Ukraine has biological research facilities, which, in fact, we are now quite concerned Russian forces may be seeking to gain control of. So we are working with the Ukrainians on how they can prevent any of those research materials from falling into the hands of Russian forces should they approach. Ukraine has...
So again, this is interesting because if it was just your run-of-the-mill biology lab or biolab, I don't think that we'd have to be that concerned about it falling into Russian hands. Now, again, if I wanted to argue on behalf of the American state and NATO, probably the argument here is that Russia will, plant evidence here. And if they get control of some of these labs, they'll be able to build a narrative about the evil things Ukraine was doing in part and parcel for the United States. Honestly, I don't know. The U.S. apparently has over 300 of these biolabs across the world. There appears to be 20 plus of them in Ukraine. It's also important to understand, look at the actual GDP of Ukraine, right? I think the per capita is something like $2,000 USD dollars per citizen. And they've got a GDP, I think, comparable to some of the smaller states in America. So I think I saw someone saying, was it North Dakota? Had a similar GDP to what Ukraine has. So it is interesting that they have so many biolabs. And in addition to that, the U.S. governments came out and said that some of the research they were doing in these biolabs were really helping protect Ukraine and Ukrainians from COVID-19. So again, I'd wonder why that would be so concerning if Russia was to get a hold of this. Because to be honest, I haven't really followed the narrative about COVID-19 in Russia, but it seems like Russia doesn't really give a shit about COVID-19. Next, this is from the Chinese Foreign Ministry. So again, one, we need to take a heaping amount of salt with anything here. And I can't help but imagine that China wants to double down on this narrative about the U.S. biolabs Department of Defense, because it'll probably distract people from the Wuhan lab. But Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian said Tuesday that Beijing believes the laboratories in Ukraine are just the tip of an iceberg, and that the U.S. Department of Defense controls 336 biological laboratories in 30 countries around the world. So if you guys want to watch this video clip, I encourage you to do so. It's in the video description down below. Next, I just want to highlight this from Newsweek, where it's essentially, and this article actually came out today as well, U.S. biological weapons in Ukraine, separating the facts from fiction. And so I'll leave you guys to go through this thoroughly, but essentially what they're talking about here is that it was primarily related to coronavirus, and the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine has issued statements saying that they want to set the record straight. And so if you guys actually want to see exactly what the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine had released in regards to these biolabs, I've got a link to it in the video description down below, so I encourage you to check it out. They're saying that there's no biological warfare stuff, and this is all defensive research that's being done here and biosurveillance. But I do think that Ian Miles Chong here is right in his Twitter thread, where the way the government initially reacted to this and now the way the government's kind of talking about it kind of confirms, or at least is going to make every conspiracy theorist more suspicious and more certain that their assumptions are correct. And then he later on in his thread actually highlights a handful of stories where they were saying, fact check, false claim of U.S. biolabs in Ukraine tied to Russian disinformation campaign. And personally, I imagine this is going to be the same sorts of like false claims or fact checks that, Fauci did on Rand Paul when Rand Paul's like, you funded gain of function. And Fauci's like, no, I technically changed the definition of gain of function before we did the gain of function. So technically I didn't do gain of function. And this is part of the big problem here with why people don't trust the mainstream media, why they don't trust their government, the administration, and officials, is because it always feels like they're trying to use legalese, right? Well, technically, I didn't do that thing. Technically, I didn't kill you, or I didn't kill your dog. The bullet I shot killed your dog. And you're like, my dog's still dead. So, that's actually what really matters to me here, is more the overall intentions and the end results rather than, your technical legalese. So I imagine what's true about these fact checks is that the way the U.S. has structured these biolabs is that they don't actually directly control them or fund them, but Ukraine does. But again, when we look at the GDP of Ukraine, it seems really strange that they would have so many of these biolabs in their country. And then again, the fact that the U.S. is so concerned about Russia getting control of these biolabs, again, naturally is going to get a few of our spidey senses tingling. Next, starting to switch gears now from Ukraine into the Freedom Trucker Convoy, but these days, weirdly, the stories kind of overlap. This is from Rex Murphy. So, slippages in democracy, Justin Trudeau knows a lot about that. What would invoking the Emergencies Act over a truckers' protest be considered? And so I briefly mentioned this yesterday. Essentially, one of the first things Trudeau did when he landed in Europe was discussing how misinformation and disinformation is leading us to more authoritarian governments. And again, most of us with more than two brain cells to rub together are kind of looking at Trudeau cross-eyed and being like, bro, are you just projecting now at this point in time, or what the hell are we talking about? And it was refreshing to see not only Canadians protesting Justin Trudeau, but actually in London, England, he was being protested as well. Now, getting deeper into the Freedom Trucker Convoy, this is from the Globe and Mail. And again, I've actually linked to one of my old videos in the video description down below. I won't replay it for you now. But at that point in time, I was essentially highlighting how I thought the government, Chrystia Freeland, and the RCMP were very carefully wording their language about the bank accounts frozen. And so, again, if you'll remember, they said the RCMP never gave a list of donors to the banks in order to do things. They only gave a list of influencers and people that were believed to be the leaders of the operation. But from the Globe and Mail now, banks went beyond RCMP list of names and freezing a small number of accounts under Emergencies Act Bankers Association. Again, remember, there's over 200 bank accounts here frozen, and Justin Trudeau told us this was a fringe minority of Canadians. I'm surprised that they even had 200 bank accounts if it's such a fringe minority of Canadians that were involved in all this. The Canadian Bankers Association told MPs Monday that a small number of additional accounts were frozen under the Emergencies Act based on the bank's own risk-based reviews and were not on a list of names provided by the RCMP. So again, the narrative expands a bit here, right? We were originally told the RCMP didn't do this. But again, we're like, okay, it doesn't matter whether the RCMP told the banks to do this. What we want to know is, did the banks do this in general? And how did the banks make these decisions? So further on, this is a direct quote. We primarily relied on the names provided by the RCMP, but there were obligations under the order separate from that required banks to make their own determinations, she said. We did not rely on external information. I know there's been suggestions of leaked donor lists, etc. We did not rely on that information at all. What banks were obligated to do, though, was apply their normal risk-based approach in monitoring their accounts as they would do for money laundering or what have you. And if something then was flagged, looking through the eyes of the activities in Ottawa, then there would be, again, an obligation to freeze. So, again, they're not saying they used the leaked information. The banks are saying they didn't use it. Again, we still don't have like just a definitive sweeping statement that these were never used to attack political opponents. But what I will highlight here is, again, the way they're framing this, technically, let's say that you were part of the Freedom Trucker Convoy and you heard about bank accounts being frozen and you panicked and you went to see if yours was frozen. And then you were like, hey, I want to take out $10,000. Well, that could immediately get you flagged. And then if you had, say, donated to the Freedom Trucker Convoy, then those two pieces of information and together could essentially be used by the Canadian Banking Association to justify freezing it. Because again, understand there was almost no real mandate or real specific language here set out by Justin Trudeau and his government when they implemented the Emergencies Act. And this really should be concerning because all of this is going to be a precedent for future emergencies. The financial aspects of the powers were most unusual. The regulations approved by Cabinet allowed banks to freeze personal and business accounts without obtaining a court order and without fear of being sued. Mrs. Mason said the law compelled the banks to freeze accounts subjected to the federal orders. There was no published guidance as you would normally have for regulations, she said. That's why we had to rely on briefings from Finance Canada to make sure we had absolute clarity on implementation. But what are those exact briefings? And can the public become aware of them? Because again, right now, it feels like a lot of smoke and mirrors in regards to how the banks decided to implement this. And they should have never been given such leeway and wide discretion in regards to this. The government should have been capable of actually spelling out word for word what, why, and how bank accounts should be frozen. RCMP Assistant Commissioner Michael Arkand, who also appeared Monday at the Finance Committee, said police calls to individuals who had been in Ottawa revealed the freezing had an immediate impact. Some comments that we received were, we're not going to go back. We're back home. Please unfreeze our accounts, he said. Some people left being afraid that their accounts were going to be frozen. Yeah, no shit. If you're literally going to destroy someone's financial lives and financial future, that's going to scare the fucking shit out of normal human beings. But again, I don't know how that justifies implementing these measures. The government told us we could shoot you on sight. It turns out that scared people away from being on sight. Yeah, no shit, Sherlock. Again, that doesn't actually justify the actions that you guys were implementing here. And again, I personally am very biased in this. I don't think we're ever going to get, I know essentially we're never going to get a satisfactory answer about how this was an emergency. One interesting thing right now, reminder, this didn't pass in the Senate. They actually canceled it before it got to the Senate. There's rumors that essentially the reason they canceled it before they got it to the Senate was they didn't think it would pass. And so because it didn't pass the Senate, I've seen some interesting questions or lines of inquiry about, was this actually legal then if it never got fully approved? And honestly, I hope that there's a judge out there that still has a soul and will actually, if they find themselves in front of this case, they will seriously look into that and get to the bottom of it. Because again, if the government can enact the Emergencies Act and then just press the undo button before it actually gets approved, but they can do whatever they want during that interim period, that should be very fucking concerning for all Canadians involved. Now, talking about the Freedom Trucker Convoy, while it may not be making as much headline news, reminder, the witch hunt still continues. Interim Ottawa Police Chief considering action against officers who allegedly supported the Freedom Convoy. Again, what's scary about this is how broad of a definition supporting could be, right? So Does it count as support if you were just nice to a trucker? Does it count as support if you like took a coffee from them? Does it count if you donated to them when it was still a legal protest before the Emergencies Act was announced by dictator Trudeau? Again, I personally think that we're going to see a lot of good people chased out of the system because of these witch hunts. And this is very similar to the firing of individuals because they wouldn't get vaccinated because they want to actually have their own medical freedom. And they thought they deserved bodily autonomy in the workplace. And understand that even if we see all these things undone, there's still a lot of damage done to the boots on the ground individuals that got fired. Or there's still a lot of damage done to the individuals here that are essentially being blacklisted, demonized by the press, and oftentimes let go from their positions or their businesses being attacked because of that data leak. Again, our government's been completely silent in regards to condemning that hack, right, of Give, Send, Go. And they've been completely silent in regards to the fact that a website was put together doxing all donors. They've been silent to the fact that we're seeing literally posters put up in Ottawa saying, here's a list of locals that donated to Ottawa, and here's their physical addresses. Yeah, we're completely mum on that subject matter. It seems like as long as the mainstream press and the politicians agree to demonize one group of people, right now it's the Russians, and whenever they got free time, they'll demonize the trucker convoy protesters. But right now it's primarily the Russians. And again, the NPCs out there are just more than happy to froth at the mouth and have someone to hate and blame for all their problems, rather than actually asking about, what sort of society and country do we want to live in here in Canada. Next from CBC News, the committee reviewing Trudeau's use of the Emergencies Act faces a daunting task. So if you guys want to get a bit of a better understanding about what's going on with the committee that's going to be looking into the implementation of the Emergencies Act, link in the video description down below. Again, a reminder, it's not actually being led by the CPCs. It's actually a panel of members from multiple political parties. The CPCs originally were pushing, and they stated they believe that it should be the opposition party that chairs this committee. It essentially went to a formal vote because the Liberals absolutely did not want that to have happened. And it turns out, the NDP and I think the Bloc in this case were more than happy to carry water for the Liberals. Now from iPolitics, again, just process nerd, what we know so far about the review of Emergencies Act. So if you guys want to jump into it, but just a reminder, essentially, we're not entitled to their final review or report until June 23rd. And at this point in time, based upon our news cycle, I imagine we'll have 3 or 4 emergencies between now and then. And this will all just kind of fade to the memory hole, right? Next from Global News, Freedom Convoy forums find new focus disinformation about Russia-Ukraine war. So I'm not sure if you guys are actually a member of the Freedom Convoy Telegram group. It's got over 30,000 people. I'm not sure if you guys are on Telegram in general, but unless you've got extremely active mods on Telegram, and you've got a large community, there's naturally going to be some crazy ass shit going on in the comments, and people are going to share some crazy ass shit. Again, it's difficult to also understand what's fake or what's false flag, right? As in bad actors purposely being bad versus maybe good intentioned people that actually either are sharing misinformation, are confused, or just trying to figure out what the hell's going on. But here, Global News was more than happy to essentially demonize this group. Again, to be honest, most Telegram groups, unless they're very carefully curated by moderators, I just find them to be shit shows. Doesn't matter what corner of the internet. And I think that for those of you that aren't familiar with this, another good analogy would be comparing it to the comment section on like a news article. So I encourage you, if you want to see some of the stuff being shared in this Telegram group that Global News was focusing on, it's linked in the video description down below. But it'd be like me going to the comment section right here, right now, on this Global News article, and saying that whatever crazy shit shows up. Oh, I can't even see it now. Oh, because I'm not logged in on this computer. But anyways, half the comments here are actually spammers being like, do you want to earn $15,000 a day from home with no work involved? And it'd be like, that I could essentially jump to conclusions and be like, Global News is actively participating in trying to scam people because they allow these comments in their comment section. It's like, no, your mods and your bots just aren't good enough to curate this content. So again, I imagine there is some crazy shit being shared in that Telegram group. I'm in it, but I've got muted because I just can't keep up with it. But to really make this a main focal point, I think is silly. when, again, we're literally seeing our government administration and politicians demonizing pretty much anyone of Russian heritage, any expats. Like we're seeing Russian community centers, Russian churches attacked and defaced as well. And yet, where's the outcries from politicians on the national level in regards to that? They don't care because it's not convenient to their narrative and their focus right now. Next from National Post, Michael Chong, the world has changed. Canada needs a serious foreign policy. If we are serious about our foreign policy, Canada could play an outsized role in contributing to Europe's collective defense and security. I guess my number one question is, why? Why should Canada play an outsized role in Europe's defense? Seriously. And I know I'm in my heart of hearts a non-interventionist, right? If someone was to invade Canada, absolutely, let's go apeshit and defend it. But for Eastern Europe or Europe in general, no, I don't see it. The same way that it's hard for me to justify wanting to go to war in Iraq or any conflict in Africa or conflicts in South America or really anything that doesn't directly impact Canadians. And while a lot of people will claim that it's good intentions and they're trying to create a more peaceful and better world, understand that like these situations are so freaking complex. And honestly, the more layers of the onion you peel back, the more you realize there aren't good guys out there. There's just people that maybe have been able to wash their hands clean, or they're able to distract people better. If you guys want to dive deeper into the Ukraine conflict, I really encourage you to check out Oliver Stone's documentary, Ukraine on Fire. And I actually shared a link to a YouTube version of the movie in the Problems for Profits Discord. So if you guys are interested in checking that out, links to the Problems for Profits Discord in the video description down below. But let's move on, get into our first blue pill story of the day. And this is from CTV News. Ontario shoots down idea of temporarily cutting gas tax as prices climb. Ontario's energy minister has shot down the idea of a temporary cut to gas taxes similar to Alberta's as prices at the pump continue to climb. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney announced on Monday the government will temporarily stop collecting the provincial fuel tax on April 1st, cutting fuel prices by 13 cents per liter. The tax would be indexed to the cost per barrel of West Texas Intermediate and would return when prices drop below $80 USD. When asked about whether Ontario would consider a similar policy, Minister Todd Smith said the province would only cut taxes if the federal government slashes the GST first. I guess my biggest question is, why does the federal government slashing GST first matter in regards to your focus on helping on Ontario? And any moves we make in Ontario will be contingent on the federal government making a change to their taxation policy, Smith told reporters at Queen's Park Tuesday. So, just interesting, wanted to share that with you guys. Next from Reuters, Canadian dollar decouples from oil, adding to Bank of Canada inflation headaches. And again, we're going to see it appears like, if not unprecedented inflation in the coming months to come, I think we'll be flirting with unprecedented inflation. And if not, it means that we're going to either be entering a major recession or depression, in my opinion, or alternatively, it's going to mean that like the Bank of Canada, honestly, I just don't see, because like the Bank of Canada would have to jack rates out of lockstep with the U.S. So we'd have to increase our rates so much more over what I believe the U.S. Fed is capable of doing this year. And I don't buy it. So I think inflation's here to stay. You should adjust your family budgets and prepare for it to the best of your ability. Don't just hope that what the Bank of Canada and politicians tell you about it tapering off in the summer because reasons. I don't buy it. Next from Western Standard, the railroading of Randy Hillier. And this is an important one, and this brings us actually into our first red pill story of the day. If you guys didn't see, well, first of all, if you don't know who Randy Hillier is, I encourage you to check him out. He's been one of the most outspoken Canadian politicians and certainly the most outspoken member of provincial parliament in Ontario in regards to lockdowns, mandates, and things of that nature. Now, again, does Randy sometimes shoot from the hips when it comes to his Twitter page? Absolutely. Do I think that 100% of everything he's ever said is 100% accurate and truthful? No. But swear to God, I don't believe that that's the case with a single Canadian politician. And, as you guys have heard me ramble on about, I don't believe that's the case for any politician in the history of politicians other than maybe Ron Paul. But it is interesting to see the railroading of Randy, because essentially the demonization of him simply because of one tweet in regards to Omar Algebra and calling him a terrorist. And honestly, this is just my personal opinion. I'm biased, but I think if Omar was instead, Joe Smith, and Randy had called him a terrorist, there'd be no issues here. I think it's because of his, I think it's because of identity politics. I don't know what the hell else to call it. But so let's dive into exactly what happened. The Hansard transcript of the entire proceeding is only 175 words. And so this was brought up in provincial parliament and simply discussing they wanted Randy to apologize or essentially be censored until he apologizes. And Hansard was the one that put it forward. So the Hansard transcript of the entire proceeding is only 175 words long from the moment Calandra began Calandra was the one that made the motion. Calandra began making his motion until the speaker declared it carried. At normal speaking speeds of 150 to 160 words per minute, this means the whole thing must have happened in just over 1 minute. This proceeding shows a blatant disregard for the principles of fundamental justice. Calandra presented no evidence in support of his allegations. He never even specified the words he alleged to be racist, discriminatory, or an incitement to violence. He gave no opportunity to the accused to refute them. Hillier was not in attendance that day and had been given no advance notice that his conduct would be the subject of any motion. Much to their discredit, no member of the House then present asked any questions and no debate was held. Note that in order to be released from the penalties laid upon him in the charade, Hillier would first have to admit his guilt by writing letters of apology. Otherwise, he wouldn't be allowed to make a peep in the House. What if the allegations made against him weren't true in the first place? The vicious circle would demand he confess to something he hadn't done in order to have the opportunity to deny having done it. Who appointed MPP Calandra the grand censor of the Ontario legislature? By what rights does he deprive the voters of Hillier's riding, Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston, of their representative's voice in the legislature? By what right does he deprive me and thousands of others like me, Ontario voters who are not in Hillier's riding, but who think that Hillier has done a far better job of representing our views over the past 2 years than any other member of the House, of the main voice speaking there for us? And this is important. Hillier also announced that he's essentially not going to be running for re-election. Personally, I think Ontario politics will be the worst for that. But I can certainly understand why he wouldn't want to put himself and his family through more public spectacle. Again, understand that, to the best of my knowledge, this refers to one tweet calling Omar Algebra a terrorist in regards to the way the Liberal Party was attacking everyday Canadians that were protesting the Liberal Party. Jumping over now to the Toronto Star, Ontario MPP Randy Hillier suspended from Twitter. So again, it's hard for me to look at this completely unbiased, because it just seems like whenever there's someone that doesn't fit within the mainstream corporate press legacy media's narrative, they just unperson them. Let's just deplatform and delete them to the best of our abilities and demonize them and make sure that they and their supporters can't actually try and explore open discourse on the subject matter, right? We're just going to label them a thought criminal and delete them from history. So if you guys want to check out this Toronto Star article, you can find in the video description down below. Next, this is from canoe.com. A stateless sexual predator who victimized women in Ottawa released. So Magabi Suleiman, 40, has been designated as a danger to the public under the Immigration Refugee Protection Act. This is a pretty wild story. I encourage you guys, if you feel like just red pilling yourself more on the Canadian criminal system, this would be a great start. And essentially, because he claims to be stateless and they can't prove what country he originates from, he gets to stay in Canada, which is wonderful for Canada, despite the fact that he's still a danger to the public, according to the Immigration Refugee Board. Next, this one, I couldn't even decide whether this should be under my red pill, black pill, or white pill stories of the day. But we're going to call it a black pill. And so it's our first black pill. And honestly, I can't believe this reporter shared this clip because it feels like a cell phone. It's a little bit quiet at the start, but essentially, this reporter asked Governor Ron DeSantis if he supported HB 1557, which was a bill that legislation critics had called the Don't Say Gay bill, even though the word gay isn't even involved in it. And Ron DeSantis just completely owns him, in my opinion. So let's watch this.
Amendment 7, parental rights and education, what critics call the Don't Say Gay bill, is on the Senate floor.
Does it say that in the bill?
I know that you support.
Does it say that in the bill?
I'm
asking you to tell me what's in the bill because you are pushing false narratives. It doesn't matter what critics say.
Well, it says it bans classroom instruction on sexual identity and gender orientation.
For who?
For
grades pre-K through 3. So 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds. And the idea that you wouldn't be honest about that and tell people what it actually says, it's why people don't trust people like you, because you peddle false narratives. And so we disabuse you of those narratives. And we're going to make sure that parents are able to send their kid to kindergarten without having some of this stuff injected into their school curriculum.
Yeah. Seems pretty fucking reasonable, in my opinion, that essentially you wouldn't want kindergartners, grade 1s, grade 2s, grade 3s, having to discuss sexual orientation and gender politics and identity. And the fact that you're going to frame this as Don't Say Gay is just wild, in my opinion, and shows as Ron DeSantis says, it's the exact reason why so few people trust the mainstream media now. Because the mainstream media doesn't actually give a shit about the truth. They don't give a shit about actually trying to get to the bottom of issues. They just want to present the narrative that they believe will protect them from cancel culture. And yeah, we need to cancel culture as fast as we can, in my opinion. If you guys want to read an article on this subject matter, I've linked to a post-millennial article, again, just about Florida did end up passing that anti-groomer law banning gender identity indoctrination in schools. Which, again, it's really different when you frame it as Don't Say Gay or anti-groomer. And I understand, as a culture, that's where we are now. There's almost no middle ground. And it's just wild to think that we couldn't actually just explore and be like, hey, you know what? Maybe kids in grade 3 and younger, right? Like, if your age isn't even in the double digits, maybe you shouldn't be being taught by the public school system, the state school system, what gender identity is and what sexual orientation is and all that stuff. And going a little bit deeper down that rabbit hole brings us to a Louder with Crowder article. And if you guys just really want to get your blood boiling, this would be a great one, in my opinion. So Sexy Summer Camp teaches kids about prostitution, sex on drugs, and hands-on instruction in masturbation. Yeah, I don't even want to explore this too much, but this stuff apparently is real and exists, and I don't think our society is better for it. But if you guys want to dive deep into the Louder with Crowder article, link in the video description down below. Now moving on to the Ron Paul Institute. So this was Ron Paul's weekly column. Is Putin the new coronavirus? And I'm just going to, spoiler alert, yeah. I think they'll also, like, Putin and Russia is the new coronavirus. But again, a great article from Ron Paul. I encourage you guys to check it out. Next, from Blacklock's reporter, call lawyers to conceal fees. So the public works minister, Philomena Tassi, has brought in the lawyers to conceal the value of a sole source lease to a longtime Liberal Party donor. The department is processing this access to information request with the assistance of legal services, staff wrote in a briefing note. The document was prompted by a request from the Quebec daily Le Presse. The department acknowledged awarding numerous contracts to the landowner, but withheld details. Given the location of the property and its proximity to the border, this was the ideal location, said the briefing note. Leases and contracts related to Guay Road. Contracts including a 10-year lease on a warehouse were awarded to Les Industries Guay of Saint Bernard de la Colle, Quebec. And so essentially this individual had donated over $40,000 to the Liberal Party since 2004. No other building owners were asked to submit bids. Due to the urgency of the situation, the department negotiated with the lessor, wrote staff. Leases were extended from March 1st, 2017 to March 31st, 2027 at undisclosed rates to help accommodate an increase in asylum seekers at the St. Bernard de la Colle crossing, said the department. It acknowledged Guai was identified as a supporter of the Liberal Party of Canada. And while is this going to be the biggest financial scandal in Canadian history? Absolutely not. But it's just one more sign of government inefficiency, cronyism, and their desire just to obfuscate, right? They literally look at us, citizens that want to get to the bottom and understand what the hell's going on in our government, in our country, and where the hell all our tax money goes. That's just an inconvenience, and, they'll lawyer up and try and argue and reduce the amount of information they have to disclose to you because, it might make them look bad. Next, from the Mises Institute, critical race theory is a form of Marxist re-education. And this one's really worth reading from cover to cover. We briefly mentioned James Lindsay yesterday in yesterday's live stream, but just wanted to highlight this article too. Critical race theory is the tip of a 100-year-long spear designed to gore the side of Western civilization, said James Lindsay in a recent workshop on the topic of critical race theory, CRT. Although these words may seem dramatic, they accurately describe what CRT is, a set of ideological tools that are rooted in neo-Marxism, postmodernism, and some argue Freudian psychology, and are used to re-educate people by modeling their psyches. And so I've actually linked to this video. Honestly, I think this video is a must watch. And the reason I believe it's a must watch is we need to understand where the other side's coming from. So one, we can identify their critical race theory bullshit. We can call them out on it. And we don't give them the benefit of the doubt in the subject matter, because that's what they're counting on, is that most people are just going to be like, well, yeah, racism's bad. And they're not going to understand that, no, what critical race theory is actually claiming is the fundamental organizing principle of society is based around whiteness and keeping, the white man elevated. And that's the fundamental organizing principle of our society. And so if that's the case, it means it's persistent and ongoing and essentially can never be removed from our society. So what you need to do is actually completely tear down society in order to build a new society that will, I guess, make identity politics everything. But again, really encourage you to watch James Lindsay. He's much more poignant and well-researched on the subject matter than myself. Because CRT is Marxist in nature, the goal of creating the correct consciousness for the new man of the socialist man to be born remains well and alive in CRT's application anywhere in society. In the context of CRT, this new man possesses the critical consciousness that enables the individual to see power dynamics based on race relations everywhere and as the basis of everything in society, and importantly, to become an activist against these forces, trying to change the world by putting the ideology of CRT into practice. So again, encourage you to read the entire article, but there's this handy little chart at the bottom here. It actually didn't blow up, but essentially it's breaking down the elements of Marxist re-education, how it was implemented in communist Romania. And again, communist Romania had some of the harshest imposement, I guess, of Marxism. And again, I've mentioned multiple times, but episode 19 of the Martyr Made podcast, you will never look at communism, Stalinism, and what happened in Romania and a lot of the Eastern and Ukraine, for that matter, the same way again, because it's truly just disgusting, abhorrent. It's some of the worst displays of humanity, in my opinion. But understand, in regards to the re-education of the West in today's society through critical race theory, yes, the need to reshape the psychological landscape of the person so that the correct consciousness can be developed. Yes, through anti-racism training, the unconscious bias, all deemed negative, to be eradicated so that critical consciousness can be awakened. In regards to policing and confessions of thought crime, yes, the guilty must confess and systems to report wrongthink exist. In addition, they talk about confessions of guilt before others. And so understand, we're literally seeing it be implemented in high-level corporations and post-secondary institutions where people, but particularly white people, are made to stand up in front of the class and apologize and essentially announce their racism and that they're participating in a systemically racist society. this is really important to understand because there's going to be huge consequences to this and a lot of unintended consequences, arguably, the same way that there is in regards to green policy. I personally think that the climate change scare and critical race theory are two of the biggest things that we should keep in mind in regards to how society is going to change and evolve in the near future. And if more of us don't speak up, if more of us don't get educated on this shit, the culture that I grew up in will literally not exist in a decade or two from now. So again, I encourage you guys to watch this video from James Lindsay. It's about an hour and a half and it's pure gold and will really help you understand critical race theory, particularly if you've never been exposed to it before. Now, another black pill from Blacklock's reporter. Star grumbling led to purge. So yesterday we were talking about how the librarian at the National Archives essentially started purging history because people found it offensive. Well, it turns out, actually, one Toronto Star columnist found it offensive, wrote an article upon it, then started harassing the archivist librarian that was in charge. And so she literally, like, within a weekend decided we need to delete everything about John A. Macdonald. Anything that anyone could find offensive, we need to pull off the internet. And that's the state of affairs. We're literally, cancel culture drives most people's thinking these days. And that's why getting comfortable being judged by NPCs is so important. So if you're still wearing masks when you go to the grocery store, you need to start getting comfortable being uncomfortable in these situations because you conforming to their desires is playing directly into their hands, right? And you're going to wake up one day in a society where you're literally not going to be allowed to think anything. And understand, with some of the bills we're seeing the Liberals try and push through Parliament right now, there's the opportunity and the language there that if someone believes that you're going to say something offensive, you could potentially be canceled for it. Not that you said something offensive. And again, we should really question ourselves whether we want to make the judgment standard on whether someone's offended. Because it seems like people get offended by anything and everything these days. I'd much rather live in a society that honestly lives by sticks and stones will break my bones and words will never hurt me than the exact opposite of I need a safe space and anyone that says anything that I disagree with is triggering and offensive to my belief system. From this article, though, from Blacklock's Library and Archives Canada, sincerely sorry some users were offended by content on its website, wrote Weir. Library and Archives Canada acknowledges some of its online presence may be offensive and continues to work on correcting these issues. We recognize there will always be more work to do in this area. So this is worth reading all of the craziness from start to finish. And again, I'm going to encourage you guys to get a paid subscription to Blacklock's Reporter. I believe that what they're doing is very important, and they're one of the better, well-researched counterpoints right now to what's being pushed upon us from mainstream media. Next, another one from Blacklock's Reporter, contract for 2 months, $200,000. So this is essentially a former senator stepped down, got awarded a huge, juicy contract for helping to negotiate a indigenous settlement. And it appears that they charged above market rates in regards to the rates they charge the government. Again, if you guys want to check it out, link in the video description down below. Next from the Toronto Star, we covered this in the past, but it's worth remembering. Family of Ontario gunsmith killed by police questions watchdog's investigation. I'm just going to quickly summarize this story, but again, really encourage you guys to get better understanding. This gunsmith, the police got a search warrant in order to search his property, but they literally waited until he was in his gun workshop to execute it. And literally then they claim he had a loaded gun and pointed at an officer, and the officers shot and killed him. Whereas it turns out the gun wasn't loaded. It's questionable about whether he pointed the gun at the police. But the bigger question is, why the fuck would they execute the search warrant when he's in his gunsmith workshop, right? Why wouldn't you execute it when he's not at home, and then when he comes home, arrest him? Or execute it when he's in his house, away from his gunsmith workshop, so there's less risk or chance of an escalation of the situation. Again, I suspect that we may never get a full satisfactory answer from the story, but we should keep it top of mind, and people should continue, especially this family, to demand answers from the Ontario government. Next, this brings us into our first clown pill story of the day, And so from Rebel News, out of touch liberal elites cheer on high gas prices as patriotic sacrifice. And goddamn, is there a lot of virtue signaling right now from the mainstream politicians and the left and progressives in regards to, I'm happy to pay $4 a gallon. I'd be willing to pay $15 a gallon in gas if it means that we can, stop Russia. One, I suspect it's not going to stop Russia because it turns out China probably uses things like gas and oil as well. And China probably would be happy to buy things like, gas and oil from Russia if Russia has a surplus of those goods. And secondly, again, it's really easy when you're making above average income to virtue signal about how paying the price of gas isn't a big deal. But understand, if this goes on for an extended period of time, we're going to see this spill over into just about any and all consumable purchases, right? So it's not going to stop at the price you pay at the pump. It's going to bleed over into your groceries. It's going to bleed over into anything that depends upon the supply chain. And understand, even if some things are shipped by sea or rail, the last mile is almost always done by automobile, right? By transportation trucks, which use diesel, which is a product of oil. So again, it's wild to see the virtue signaling here and the complete lack of caring for the average man and the person that's actually seeing gas prices increase dramatically, right? We're seeing like 20%, 30% raises depending upon what state you're in. And one of the funny things circling the internet right now is that the gas price in California and in LA is actually higher than the gas prices that were shown in the movie with Will Smith, I Am Legend, where it's like a post-apocalyptic zombie world, right? So like literally the world was ending and that movie didn't imagine gas would get as high as it is today in 2022, which is both sad and funny. Now this one's from CTV News. This one actually is just pure funny, in my opinion. Bet your dog's missing you. Toronto office removes return to work posters following backlash. I saw this circling. I was like, how tone deaf are you? Like, no one's going to like look at this and be like, yeah, this makes me want to go back to the office. So there was a couple posters. They've only got the one in this one story, but like, bet your dog's missing you. And they put up these posters as their employees were returning to work from before working remotely. And, people complained and the company apologized. But I'm just curious who actually thought that was a good idea. Like, who thought, hey, it'd be funny if we rubbed it in? Another one was like, bet you're missing your sweatpants now. And it's like, why would you rub it in? I just like, I don't know. Elites and their humor. Now from the Epic Times, this brings us into our first white pill story of the day. And Belgium scraps almost all COVID-19 measures. So again, we're continuing to see the COVID narrative fall apart in just about every country. But, Canada and Ontario, we're going to hold on for dear life as long as we can to our COVID measures and mandates, because how else are we going to virtue signal to the world that we're above them and that we're more virtuous? Next from Rebel News, announcing civil liberties focused student journalism fellowship. So I thought I'd just share this with you guys because we need more civil liberty oriented journalists out there, particularly in Canada. So if you're interested, link in the video description down below. I encourage you guys to apply to it if you've thought of becoming a journalist, because again, Canada needs a lot more real journalism and a lot less just corporate shilling and politician shilling media. Now let's move on to our memes of the day. First one here, CNN new study finds, but this makes no sense because, shut up, idiot. You're not an expert. The science has settled. Newer study finds, but this is exactly what I told you. Shut up, idiot. The science changed. It's actually really hard these days to not feel that way to a certain extent. That one maybe hits too close to home. And then next, I really like this one. America must get involved. Russian soldiers are pulling babies out of incubators. If you guys don't remember the first Iraq war, essentially there was testimony from this lady who lady girl who was a daughter, if I'm not mistaken, of a Kuwait ambassador. And it turns out this is all just bullshit and fake propaganda, similar to, the weapons of mass destruction that got us into the second Iraq war. And this is why I'm so suspicious of everything going on right now, and particularly a lot of things going on in Ukraine. Because there's certain things where you just wonder, like, why would Russian soldiers do that? It feels like it would be counterproductive to trying to manage, the world's perspective on things. And then you're like, maybe there's more to the story, right? Like, remember that, I think it was the Malaysian airliner that went down in 2014 during the during the start of the Orange Revolution in Ukraine. And then, as more studies came in, it seemed like, immediately the West knew it was absolutely Russia. More information came out, and it was like, you know what? Maybe there's actually two sides to the story on this. And maybe it actually was Ukraine that shot it down. Again, it could have been by accident, but it appeared that it was an older dated missile that Russia no longer used at that point in time, but the Ukrainian army still did actually actively use. And remember the riots in Odessa, where essentially, and this is kind of me going down a rabbit hole here now, but back in 2015, when the former prime minister of Georgia, which was essentially chased out of there, and he's wanted for war crimes, if I'm not mistaken, or he's wanted, he hasn't been charged of war crimes, but he's wanted in investigations there, then all of a sudden became the provincial or state leader of the Odessa, I forget what the state is, but the state Odessa's in, and we literally saw far-right nationalists burn down buildings with Ukrainian that were Russian ethnic citizens in the buildings and died, and yet the West was just like, it's a nothing burger, right? You break a few eggs in order to make an omelet. And so, yeah. Again, like I started off the show with, it's so hard to understand whether we're coming or going, in my opinion, in regards to what's going on in the world these days. I think we all need to take a beat when we see a headline that particularly, makes us angry or feels like it confirms our perspective, because everyone's got a propaganda wing. To think that only the Russians or only the Ukrainians do it is naive, in my opinion. And for those of you that like me sharing with you my perspectives and going through these stories, please smash that like button, hit subscribe. Consider sharing this on social media, because since I got my first strike, my views have been dropping off dramatically. So maybe you guys are just sick of hearing me ramble on about this. But I suspect it has something to do with that strike. I suspect that we're probably going to get more strikes in the future. So if we ever do just disappear off of YouTube, I haven't quit doing the Maple Pill. You'll still be able to find us on Rumble as well as on BitChute. Link to those channels in the video description down below. If you guys want to follow me on Instagram, it's Matt McKeever Unfiltered. There's a link to it. There's a ladybug flying in front of me right now, just going apeshit. But let's jump over to your chats. Really appreciate you guys sharing your perspectives and your opinions on everything that's going on here. So we've got Graham in the chat. We've got Sandra, Hungarian Experiment. Terry, what's up, guys? I agree. News is way too willy-nilly these days. Fact check. We've got Bang in the chat as well. It's too expensive to throw a no confidence vote, but yet send billions overseas. Again, yep, I hear you on that, Terry. I would think that Biolabs, of all sorts of tools within the institutions, again, it'll be interesting to see whether Russia actually does get control of some of these biolabs and what sort of narratives we see come out around that. Catherine says there are so many. Oh, that's spam. Terry says, I want to thank all countries for acknowledging our tyrant leader. I heard he got a hard time in England. They snuck him through the back door due to a protest against him. Yes, and I'm glad that there was video footage of that. If we don't follow the narrative, we get weeded out. Absolutely. Sandra says, I'm tired of our country going to defend freedoms in other countries. I never felt more strongly about that than when I saw our veterans get beat up, arrested, etc. during the enactment of the Emergencies Act in our own Canadian soil. So disgusting. I stopped talking to friends and family who actually did not stand up on their social media to oppose it. Then, in even further disgust, I watched them fall in the bandwagon of the Ukraine cause. Yeah, and again, understand that at least I want to share my perspective here. If someone only watched my shows here, the Maple Pill, I could understand them thinking that, man, Matt really goes to bat for Putin or Russia or whatever. It's like, no, this is the Maple Pill. I want to focus on what's good for Canada, not what's good for Ukraine. Again, that's not to say that you as a Canadian citizen can't choose to focus on what's good for Ukraine, but I am going to call out the hypocrisy when you're not willing to defend freedoms and rights here in Canada, and you're willing to immediately demonize any of your political opponents. understand that Orange Revolution, again, the Oliver Stone documentary is a fantastic expose and exploration of the subject matter. It started off as peaceful protests that continued to escalate as essentially politicians refused to interact with their citizens, and eventually led to a full-blown revolution. Now, whether the West funded it, whether, they had neo-Nazis helping support it, and the Azov brigade and things of that nature, after watching the Oliver Stone documentary, I kind of lean towards that. But these are complex situations, but the fact that so many Canadians don't want to have these difficult conversations about Canada and only want to virtue signal on social media and like, I'm going to, change the color profile of my profile photo so that it shows yellow and blue. And, look at me, I'm such a good person now. And it's like, oh man, that changing your profile photo doesn't make you a good person. Being willing to essentially give up nothing and, promote, war and chaos in a foreign land, again, doesn't make you a good person. The same way that the people that were bandwagon jumping on the Iraq war and pretty much a lot of the color revolutions that the US and NATO helped promote or prop up. Again, at this point in time, I guess I'm not willing to give nearly as much leeway for good intentions versus the actual results and policies being implemented. I think, if you're going to have adult conversations, you need to start actually informing yourself, right? You need to actually not just immediately regurgitate the first headline you see. You need to be willing to actually explore these ideas, steel man the other side, and again, be open to new information. And again, I'm open to new information in regards to any and all stories we cover here. But the key is understanding that when there's one side that's extremely powerful, that has all the money, that's constantly put up on a pedestal and described as the right, not the right-left dichotomy, but essentially as in they're always right? Mainstream media never gets it wrong. Canadian politicians never get it wrong. When challenged on who I'm going to give more of the benefit of the doubt to, who I'm going to give a grain of salt, it's going to be the smaller citizen journalists. It's going to be individuals that are willing to support and show both sides. Like the fact that the mainstream media right now still just wants to demonize and continue their witch hunt on Freedom Trucker Convoy supporters. The fact that, they're going to spend all this time focusing on what's shared in a random Telegram chat, to me, shows the level of authenticity they're entering in these conversations with, right? Like they don't actually care about the truth. They care about making sure that they get the government money for next year's budget, and they want to make sure that they get promoted or they get a chance to receive an award from industry insiders rather than actually focusing on defending freedom in Canada. Sorry, that was kind of a random rant I went down, but I'll jump a little bit further down here. Aislinn says, who do you think creates more confusion, unsatisfactory answers to question, the mainstream media or writers of Lost? That's a sore subject, Aislinn, because I loved Lost, particularly the first 2 seasons of it. But, was it 6 seasons long? By season 6, god damn, it was confusing and had me spinning in circles. And again, I spent time going deep down rabbit holes on forums and this, that, and the other. The white guy and the guy in the white and the guy in the black, Jacob, all that stuff, and definitely unsatisfactory answers. However, at least with Lost, they knowingly told us it was a fiction. No one pretended that was real life or how the world actually worked. Whereas with our mainstream media, they actually do pretend that their LARPing is real life. What else we got? We got Marianne. Hell, my son has a biolab in his bedroom. Okay. I got a feeling there may be different biolabs, but I am signed up for notifications on this channel. Since your strike, I don't get them every day anymore. It seems random now. Yeah, absolutely. Oh man, this is a right-wing spin. You should be concerned about Ukraine because Putin has been compromising the U.S. Republican Party. The trucker rally was funded in Canada by them. So, Marianne, you just like regurgitating headlines, I see, rather than actually focusing on facts, right? Because, we actually have testimony from not Give, Send, Go, the GoFundMe, where it said 88% of donors were Canadian, 86% of donations came from Canada. So was that all Russian hackers, flowing it through Canadian proxies? Again, just because the CBC tells you one thing and their only expert is a speculative journalist doesn't actually make it real, right? And why do you care so much about the Ukraine, Marion? But I suspect you don't give a shit about the 200,000 plus that have died in Yemen, or the 2 million Uyghur Muslims that are in concentration camps. Again, I've got no patience for your fucking virtue signaling at this point in time. And I don't think a lot of other individuals that actually care about truth, transparency, and authenticity do either. Again, if you're willing to die on the hill for every single cause in the world, so be it. But I don't see why you should drag Canada into every single foreign conflict. Again, isn't that the reason that we have things like the UN? Isn't that the reason that we're part of treaties like NATO? And again, NATO should be for just NATO, right? Wasn't it the North Atlantic Treaty Organization? Really weird that we're dealing with Eastern Europe for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, don't you think? Anyways, appreciate you guys. And Marion, enjoy being wrong for the rest of your life. But hey, it is probably very comforting being blue-pilled throughout your existence, because you get to pat yourself on the back at all times and you never have to critically think in regards to what's going on. But I see Marion believes that all roads lead to Russia. I also cared about all those conflicts. So are you demanding Canada enter all those conflicts as well, Marion? To the same degree that you're demanding that we get involved in the Russian one? Yeah, I didn't think so. Anyways, appreciate you guys. I'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, those of you that enjoy this, please do consider sharing it on social media, because big tech's going to do us no favors. But yeah, that's it for tonight. I'll see you tomorrow.
Asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chat, believing in my own will. Web fire, math, evil scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still with no chill. Need to come and take it if you wanna mess with my hill. We've been 3D printing, setting ready for that ghost kill.